You're listening to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor, powered by bbbgive.org. Here we explore the motivations that form the basis of giving and service. We inspire generosity and celebrate the transformative effects that giving and service have on the human spirit and on community. The conversations featured on the podcast also uncover giving strategies that educate and provide tools to help listeners make impactful gifts of both their time and money. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to the Heart of Giving podcast, powered by bbbgive.org. Give.org is the nation's standards-based charity evaluator and your one-stop source for information on giving and reports on the most asked about charities. I'm Art Taylor, your host. Angela Kim left a career in corporate America because she wanted to find more direct ways to give back. She's now employed in a DC-based charter school. Angela, thank you for joining me today on the Heart of Giving podcast. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here.
Angela, I guess the big question for us is, how does a person go from a lucrative career in corporate America to getting a master's degree in nonprofit management and restarting her career in a charter school?
So to answer your question, I think it might be a bit of a longer story, but I think it has a lot to do with my upbringing and sort of my early childhood of why I ultimately made this switch in my career. So in my childhood, we grew up in Baltimore County in Maryland. My family came here as immigrants. I came here to the US when I was 3. My parents obviously came here in search of the American dream. We were not well off, and we were surrounded by a huge community of other Korean American immigrants in the Baltimore area that all really supported one another to obviously, achieve that American dream. And our upbringing, my sister and I, our upbringing was really shaped a lot by the mentality and culture that surrounds our family being Korean American, which is that largely our education is priority number one, and your success is really defined by making sure you are financially independent and wealthy and having a job that makes you, your family, and your parents proud. So that was my really main driver for a really, really long time. And that was really ingrained in how I thought about my future and what that should look like. So we eventually started living in a more middle-class suburban neighborhoods. My parents were doing much better, and they really were able to achieve that American dream for my family. And my sister and I really grew up in a wonderful neighborhood and an environment and everything. And the way that my parents were able to do that were because they didn't have great English speaking skills and they didn't have, high school, college degrees. They owned a variety of different kinds of businesses in inner Baltimore County, or inner Baltimore City, I'm sorry. And so my sister and I, on the weekends, we spent a lot of time down in the inner city parts of Baltimore. And we spent decades there on the weekends helping my parents out. And so my sister and I would be ringing up the cash register. We'd print lottery tickets. We would grab stuff. We would stock the shelves. And over those decades, I really saw the stark contrast between how my family and how these families in Baltimore really grew up and how completely different our lives were. And I didn't really understand what that meant when I was a kid. But as I grew older, I started to really realize the impact of what that meant for these families and the kids that were living in this area compared to what my future looked like and how I envisioned my future. And so I started realizing that the impact of their environment, their upbringing, the health and nutrition that was made available to them, it was definitely in areas where they were food deserts. So I don't think they had the same accessibility to healthy and nutritious foods that we had. Their education opportunities were quite different. And just the crime and violence and drugs that were much more prevalent in inner city Baltimore compared to where I grew up all of these things combined really meant that their future and their challenges that they would face to reach their future goals were completely different for them than compared for me. So as I really grew older, that really became such a huge differentiator for me. And that's when I really, really understood the harsh realities of what privilege and opportunities are so vastly different, and how it's really unfair that I was aspiring to go to college. I was thinking about majors, I'm thinking about careers, I was thinking about what kind of businesswoman I would like to be. And I was thinking at the time that that's probably not the same for these kids, and or might look very different. And I don't pretend to understand all of their lives, obviously, but just from what I could see, that was made very, very apparent to me. So at that time, I really, as a high schooler, I really wanted to commit myself to serving later in life. When I grew up, I was more able to give back, however that would look, whether it was financially or serving or whatever. I really wanted to give back to the communities that didn't have the same opportunity and shot that I did. So jumping ahead a bit, I went to college at UMCP at University of Maryland College Park, and I majored in communications and public relations. And I had this one internship with the Boys and Girls Clubs of Greater Washington, which was the headquarters in the DC metro area. And I loved that mission. It was working with kids, a lot of them in lower income areas, which I really connected to because that's what I saw when I spent a lot of time in Baltimore. And I found that it really fed my soul, and I loved my time there. I just enjoyed everything about it. And when I left that internship, I really vowed to come back there someday in the future when I was much more stable and I had a career going and I was more in better capacity to give back. So years later, I finished college. I was in my career path. I was in my 20s. I was doing great. And I was working for various tech companies. I was making money, successful as I had defined it. I was building my career. So I felt I was in a good place now to start giving back. And so I started volunteering. I started working with animal organizations, community organizations. And then I even went back to Boys and Girls Clubs now as a volunteer with more experience, with more capacity to give, whether financially or with my time. So I started off working on events there. I started volunteering for a lot of different things and a lot of different capacities. And I absolutely loved it. And this is all the work that I did on this in my spare time. I also started something called the Next Generation Committee, which was a junior board. And I saw that there was a need for folks like myself at the time that were young professionals, and we really wanted to give back and do more. And so I had that group going for several years. And then I also became a board member for a number of years. At the same time, during this period of my life, I really started realizing I was not enjoying my day job, which I was working for very wonderful technology companies. And I just was not fulfilled anymore. I was going to work and it was just becoming a chore. And it was just not motivating me the same that it used to. And I felt a huge pull and I gravitated so much more to my volunteer work at the time. My volunteer work at the time, working with Boys and Girls Clubs, I thought about, I was excited about it. I could see the impact that I was making immediately and then long term. I could see the change that I was making. I really had purpose and mission with my volunteer work. So for years, I actually struggled with this decision whether I should stay with my career path or just switch over to the nonprofit world. It was a major switch in my head that I needed to make for myself, that I can move away from, success being only defined by financial success, and that there's much more to life than just that. And I really didn't want to have any regrets. So After a long time and talking to a lot of people, I finally made the switch. I made that jump. I decided to get my master's at Columbia University with a nonprofit management program. And I finally had that purpose and mission to why I was doing this. And I don't think I ever had that before. So I'm really glad that I waited to get my master's degree because I went into it soaking up everything. And I just had that burning desire and intention with attending the program. And I just absolutely loved everything about it. And the reason why I did it was because I obviously wanted to be successful and not go into the industry with having assumptions and stereotypes. And I needed to get rid of that quickly. And I really obviously wanted to learn from industry experts like yourself, Art, and then other veterans in the field, and then also really meet my peers and colleagues that I would be leaning on in the future. And I have absolutely no regrets about that. So I'm currently with a charter school in DC, and I picked this organization because the mission and the work was so amazing. And it's really uplifting the community. We work in the adult charter school space within Northeast and Southeast DC and lower income neighborhoods that serve mostly minority populations. And we're helping adults to earn their GED and career certifications that really uplift these adults and then also consequently their families that they support as well. And it's extremely rewarding work. I see all of the adults overcoming extremely, amazing challenges and barriers that they've carried with themselves for decades, and then finally moving on to bigger and better opportunities. So it's extremely rewarding work overall, day in and day out, because I do work very, very hard. And this just all uplifts our communities, especially in the times we're living now. So I regret none of it, and I'm really happy to be where I'm at today.
Let me just say wow to that. That is quite a story, Angela, and it makes complete sense for you to move towards something that fulfills you rather than simply doing something that made money, although you obviously had a chance to do that and now you have a chance to actually do both. It's so interesting that many people believe that service is sacrifice, but obviously you see that quite differently. You know how you can make a living and serving at the same time, which is something that people need to understand more about. There's so many questions that I would want to follow up with you on these answers. One of them has to do with this transition that you made and whether you found any unusual surprises during that transition from let's say working in the corporate world to now in the nonprofit sector.
Yeah, sure. I don't think this was a huge surprise, but it was just more of a realization once I started working in the nonprofit space at my first nonprofit job. I mean, I definitely heard this time and again during my program as well as from my other peers, but the lack of the resources was definitely something that really has an impact on my job day in and day out. So I definitely could see how you have to make do without a lot of the resources that I once really took for granted before when I was at my corporate job. So that means the plethora of the IT systems and tools and automated systems that help make your work more efficient and effective. So I think that's something that is a bigger contrast for me, and having to get my mind adjusted to that change. I really actually appreciate and really have a newfound respect for the resiliency and the hard work of all the people that I'm surrounded by, especially during this pandemic where everybody has been pushed to their limits and pushed to be creative, think outside of the box. You have in some cases, we've had to totally reinvent the wheel and make a 180-degree turn with how we operate. I mean, I've been really impressed with the resiliency of the people that I work with in the community. And that's been extremely impressive. But people do work extremely hard. There's a lot of very smart people. And I know there's some stereotypes about nonprofit folks, but I'm surrounded by very, very smart people. And I think lastly, I kind of knew about this, but I've been pleasantly surprised that there's definitely more of a family feel with the folks that I work with. And it's not just coworkers and colleagues per se. So those are the things that have surprised me.
Angela, obviously, not everyone is going to be able to leave their corporate job to do as you did to start a career in the nonprofit sector. But what can people do who are working full time in a corporate job to actually give back and make a difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. I got involved in a number of ways before I decided to work full time in the nonprofit sector. So while I was working in the corporate world, there are so many different ways to give back and to get involved. For example, there are many companies now that have corporate giving programs that do that collectively across the entire organization. And if that doesn't happen at your organization, you can definitely reach out to start something like that. Additionally, there have been some smaller group kinds of initiatives where maybe some people on your team want to do something together and want to give back to the community or participate with some service work. I've seen a lot of corporations have giving days or volunteer days. So teams or larger teams or companies participate and partner with particular organization, a nonprofit organization, to work with them on a one-time or multiple occasion basis. So I've seen all varieties of that. And then also, outside of participating with your corporate organizations, just personally, obviously, there are tons of different opportunities that I see constantly. For example, when I was living in Fairfax County, there are, I think, like volunteer sign up databases, kind of like a volunteer match database and service where you can sign up for a particular volunteer opportunity depending on your interest, your availability, or what you really care about working towards or supporting. And then you can find those particular causes and missions to work with. So you can do it that way. And I have done that as well. I've seen a lot of my friends participate in various giving causes and campaigns and raising money for different things. So I've participated in many of those. I've led some of those myself. So I think there's a ton of different ways to get involved without having to make a jump to working in nonprofit full time if you're not able to. And again, I'll just reference what I did earlier is I intentionally really sought after a particular cause and organization because I really cared about that. And so I went out and sought that opportunity myself. And so then when I got there, luckily there were so many opportunities for me to really get involved and what I wanted, what I could bring to the table, and the skill sets that I had or the time that I had and my energy and my interests, they really let me flourish and kind of take it and run with it. And so they gave me great opportunities to do that. So again, we created from nothing. We created an entire junior board group that we really did a lot in the time that I was there with the organization. And we made a huge impact. And so I'm so thankful for that opportunity, that experience, and having worked with my colleagues in the Next Generation Committee because we did so much together as a group. And most importantly, we really lived out our purpose and mission with the Next Generation Committee because we intentionally wanted to make an impact with the kids there, with the Boys and Girls Clubs. And so we did that day in and day out. So it was a great experience overall. But the point of what I'm saying is that whatever you want to do, you can go out and find it. And if one organization is not a good fit, there are many organizations out there. And it's just finding the right one that's a great fit for you and the organization. But I think there's plenty of opportunities out there.
Angela, giving isn't always considered logical in that we take something that we've earned or something that we've acquired and we're handing it off or sharing it with someone else. In your opinion, what makes it a rational thing to do? What makes giving and sharing and service something that every human being should do?
I think for me, in my personal opinion, I feel like it is our duty to give back to society and to your community with whatever skills or strengths that I have and whatever resources that I can give. And there have been a lot of people in my life that have helped me along the way. I didn't get to where I am today by myself, obviously. And, English as a second language when I was younger, and my parents working a lot, to give us the opportunities that we have now. There were a lot of people that really helped shape me and guide me and mentor me. And so now that I'm in a position where I am in a stable environment, financially or with time, I feel like it is my job to give back to my community and my neighbors. And whether that is financially or if I feel that I want to give back with my skills or my time, whatever that is, it really was something very strong in me, especially when I was younger, like I mentioned, that I felt like I needed to give back to other people that may not have had those same luxuries or opportunities that I had. And so for me, initially it was time that I had to give when I was younger as a younger professional. I didn't have huge amounts of financial resources to give thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. What I had at the time that made sense was my time. And at that time, I wanted to help out with different local nonprofits or organizations. And at the time, it was Boys and Girls Clubs and working with the kids. And that evolved to I could really take advantage and leverage my strengths and skill sets that I could bring to the table. And I helped with programming and events and project management, et cetera. And then that eventually grew to where I could give more of my time that made more sense. And then my interests were deeper. And it evolved to, creating a group and leading people and creating more events and fundraising events and then working on the board, et cetera. But it was what I could personally give and where it made the most sense with how I wanted to apply that for a particular cause that I cared very deeply about. And so that is different for everybody. Some people may not have the time, so maybe they give financially or whatever works for you in particular. And so I think giving, no matter what that is for a person, is all important. If one person gives financially, but the next person gives with their time and they're making phone calls or mentoring or serving meals or cleaning kennels or supporting a group of victims or serving on a board or whatever it is, all of that is really, really important. And I think what might hold some people back is maybe they think it's daunting or they think, oh, my $5 really won't matter. I'm not going to cure cancer. I'm not going to solve world peace. But in actuality, if I give $5 or $100 or I give my time or whatever that is of whatever my giving is, all of that is all very important. And I don't know, I mean, I didn't really understand before I went through the nonprofit management program, but individual giving is really the crux of charitable giving and within the nonprofit sector. And individuals make up 68% of all charitable giving, and that is huge. So what that means is that, you, me, my neighbor, my friend, whether I'm giving $5 or 100 or $1,000, all of that adds up and it makes huge things happen and huge movements occur from that, and massive, and you can see right now even, people are showing up, they're attending marches, they're protesting online, in person. All of that adds up and it makes a difference. And so I think that it's important for people to understand that all of that matters, no matter how big or small. And I really think it's our duty to give back, to support one another in the community and your neighborhood.
There's real power in the collective, and we become a collective by
Mhm.
being individuals who give what we can. And you're so right to emphasize the importance of giving at whatever level you're able to give. Well, Angela, I can't thank you enough for joining me today in this podcast. And I want to just let you know that whatever you're doing in life, if you need my help, I'll be there. And I just know that people listening to you today, you're going to have an effect on them. Someone listening to this podcast may be on the fence about what they should be doing in their life, or maybe at a point in their lives where they're thinking about transition. And your story will truly inspire some people to go out and be more and do more. And so I just want to thank you for sharing it. And you're listening to the Heart of Giving podcast powered by bbbgive.org. I'm Art Taylor, and I hope you'll join us for our next episode.
You've just listened to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor. Be sure to tune in next time for a brand new episode. To listen to our other interviews, visit heartgiving.podbean.com. That's heartgiving.podbean.com. Subscribe to our show on major podcast platforms. Send your comments and ideas to nona@thusmarket.com. That's Nona at thusmarket.com. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance or program affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Podbean's terms of service.